Welcome to my channel, The Interest Rate and the Great Reset Bubble. That is the title of today's video. Even though many deny it and don't want to admit it, it exists nevertheless, the Great Reset. The latter refers to a set of ideas that ranges from stakeholder capitalism to wokeness, and fourth industrial revolution to transhumanism. And it is effectively popularized, especially through the WEF, that is, the World Economic Forum. The fight against viruses and epidemics, and particularly the politically driven move away from fossil fuels to save the global climate, are probably the most visible footprints of the Great Reset agenda. In a nutshell, the Great Reset is a politically planned overthrow, a restructuring of the global economic and social system. And this most audacious endeavor could gain particularly strong momentum in the wake of central banks' extremely low interest rate policies in recent years. A finding that is anything but surprising for those aware of the effects of downwardly manipulated credit costs. Let me remind you, as a result of the global financial and economic crisis in 2008-2009, major central banks around the world drastically reduced interest rates. In the US, for instance, the key interest rate remained at zero until almost the end of 2015, rose to just 2.5% by the end of 2018, then fell again from the summer of 2019 and remained around zero until March 2022. In an environment of extremely low interest rates, capital misdirection on a grand scale went almost unnoticed. For example, artificially low interest rates reduced the incentive to save and stimulated consumption. At the same time, investment projects that would not have been interesting without suppressed borrowing costs became attractive. As a result, the economies were lured into a false cyclical upswing, a boom. In particular, taking on additional debt became even more desirable, and the associated flood of liquidity inflated asset prices, especially the prices of stocks and real estate. An illusion of wealth emerged that obscured the fact that resources are scarce, making the enormous costs associated with the Great Reset look like a small matter. Because a de facto zero interest rate makes people's preference for instant gratification, that is, satisfying needs in the present, even more compelling than it already was. From an economic perspective, it devalued the future in favor of the here and now. As a result, the current desire to save the climate became even more urgent in people's eyes compared to their legitimate desire to have abundant goods at their disposal in the future. By no means less important, the artificially suppressed interest rates allowed states to implement their anti-free market policies with near impunity. For example, many governments around the world dictated lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, taking advantage of the coronavirus hysteria, especially triggered it. The true economic costs of the lockdown measures remained largely hidden from the eyes of the population, because governments kept the economies running through gigantic debt-financed spending packages and enormous expansions of the money supply. Everything seemed to be working in favor of the proponents of the Great Reset. The system of free markets and the free society were forced back further and further, and the push towards a command economy, an economy run by state dictate, was effectively strengthened and accelerated. Then the enormous expansion of the money supply, caused by the monetization of government debt by central banks on a massive scale, showed its undesirable side effect. Goods price inflation began to rise in 2020 with no end in sight. Given the ever-increasing inflation, central banks were forced to raise interest rates to avert a collapse of confidence in their fiat currencies. To the horror of the proponents of the Great Reset, increased interest rates now deflate the Great Reset bubble. Suddenly, the future supply of goods is no longer so meaningless for the people living in the here and now. In fact, the future supply of goods has become much more valuable again. This makes the costs of the planned exit from oil, coal and gas all the more painful. Not only is current production dwindling due to elevated energy prices, but the increased credit and capital costs are also making many companies unprofitable, exacerbating the decline in jobs and output. It becomes obvious that the income and welfare losses for the general population are enormous. The Great Reset has suddenly become an extremely expensive luxury project, and people are increasingly beginning to rebel against the impoverishment effect that comes with it. Could we perhaps conclude that the Great Reset requires an artificially lowered interest rate to be implemented? Do stakeholder capitalism and wokeness and moving away from fossil fuels only pay off in a world of artificially lowered interest rates? Does the new world order as envisioned by the proponents of the Great Reset necessarily require artificially suppressed market interest rates? Well, this would probably be an exaggeration. After all, the manipulated market interest rates are just one variable in implementing the Great Reset scheme. Irrespective of the level of the interest rate, a society of people infected by an inhumane ideology could very likely decide to sacrifice their prosperity in the here and now to achieve a state of imaginary happiness in the future, and strive towards a Great Reset and thus neo-socialism. However, a downward manipulated interest rate undoubtedly facilitates overthrowing the existing ownership and wealth structure, as it is intended by the Great Reset. That said, the interest rate policy of the central banks is something like a compass needle, a directional indicator. Continually rising interest rates throw sand into the gears of the Great Reset fanatics, while a return to the policy of lowering interest rates has the potential to fill the Great Reset bubble with new air. Couldn't it be that the central banks have undermined the Great Reset with the interest rate increases they have introduced since the beginning of 2020, so that the project is now coming to a shrieking halt? Probably not. In fact, there is little feeding this hope. At the end of the day, central bank councils fully support the economic policy agenda of their governments, including the Great Reset. So we should not foster too much hope that the latest interest rate increases have actually heralded the end of the Great Reset machination. No, the Great Reset can only be stopped and reversed if and when people wake up. This necessitates people beginning to see through the scheme, namely that the Great Reset doesn't stand for a better world, but aims to implement a global control and oppressive regime in which the individual no longer counts. The state becomes totalitarian, in which freedom and prosperity as we know it today would no longer exist. The return of the policy of lowering interest rates on the part of central banks, which is to be expected to unfold soon, must therefore be seen as the resumption of the Great Reset's fight against people's freedom and prosperity. Artificially lowered interest rates help to prevent the Great Reset bubble from imploding, or at least keep it inflated for longer than anyone who cares about freedom and prosperity would like. Again, to effectively end the Great Reset and burst the Great Reset bubble, people must wake up now, before it is too late. Thank you very much for your attention. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it, ring the bell, and please follow my channel.